During our luxurious cruise, my son, whom I had raised on millions, suddenly pushed me off the liner in the middle of the ocean, saying ominously, "The sharks will be happy to see you." He thought he had gotten rid of the old man in order to take possession of the inheritance. But when he returned home, I was already waiting for him in the darkness of the living room. With a cold smile, I said, "I brought someone here. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments." The door exploded open. "Dad, I'm 35 years old." Eric's voice cracked like a whip across my mahogany office. Papers scattered from his trembling hands onto the Persian rug I'd bought after landing the Chrysler Building renovation contract. "When will you finally hand over control to me?" I slowly removed my reading glasses, studying my son's flushed face. The late afternoon light, filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows, cast harsh shadows across his expensive suit. The one I'd paid for, like everything else in his privileged life. 40 years of building this empire from a single construction truck to a Manhattan skyscraper empire, and this is the gratitude I receive. When you deserve it. My voice carried the same steel that had commanded respect on construction sites since before he was born. Right now, you can barely handle middle management. Eric slammed his palm against my desk, sending my coffee cup rattling against the quarterly reports. I brought millions to the company, my drone surveillance projects, the AI efficiency systems, my money, my connections, my reputation. I stood deliberately, each movement calculated to remind him who commanded this room. "You just execute what I approve." His face darkened, and something desperate flickered behind his eyes. Something I'd never seen before. Not anger, but fear. Real fear. "Maybe it's time for you to retire? You're not as young as you used to be. The board notices things." The words hit like shrapnel from Vietnam. I moved to the window, looking down at the ant-like figures 47 floors below. From here, the city spread like blueprints across my drawing table. Orderly, logical, built on solid foundations. Unlike my son, apparently. I built this empire from nothing. My reflection stared back from the glass, weathered but unbroken. It will outlive both of us, but only in the right hands. "These are the right hands!" He thrust his manicured fingers toward me, designer watch glinting. "I've got Harvard business credentials, not just Vietnam jungle scars." The silence stretched between us like a bridge under too much weight. Traffic hummed 47 stories below. My awards gleamed from the walls, recognition for decades of honest work, honest deals, honest relationships, everything Eric seemed incapable of understanding. "Get out." I didn't turn from the window. "When you learn respect, we'll discuss your future." The door slammed hard enough to rattle the building permits in their frames. Through the glass, I watched the city lights begin to twinkle like stars I'd once navigated by in the Mekong Delta. Back then, survival meant trusting your instincts about people. My instincts about Eric were screaming warnings I wasn't ready to hear. The drive to Westchester gave me 45 minutes to replay Eric's words. By the time I pulled through the iron gates of my estate, darkness had swallowed the bare March trees. The Tudor mansion loomed against the night sky, every window dark except the security lights I'd installed after the Bronx project made me some enemies. My footsteps echoed across the marble foyer. Empty house, empty rooms. Margaret would have known what to say about Eric's outburst, but cancer had taken her voice 5 years ago, along with everything else. In my study, I poured 3 fingers of 25-year-old Macallan and settled into the leather chair that had witnessed 1,000 difficult decisions. The fireplace cast dancing shadows across family photos on the mantel. Eric's Harvard graduation, his first successful project presentation. Moments when pride had filled my chest like warm concrete. Private school tuition. Harvard MBA. European internships with construction firms I'd personally called to arrange. Summer houses in the Hamptons where he'd learned to sail on my 40-foot yacht. Everything handed to him on a silver platter while I'd clawed my way up from a Jersey City tenement. The whiskey burned, but not as much as the memory of his desperate eyes. That wasn't normal ambition. That was panic. I opened my laptop and logged into the company's financial system. As founder and majority owner, every expense report eventually crossed my desk. Eric's spending patterns over the past 6 months painted an interesting picture, cash advances, unexplained travel expenses, charges to high-end restaurants I knew weren't business meetings. The numbers told stories my son apparently didn't want me to read. March alone showed $12,000 in cash advances against future bonuses. February had been worse, $18,000. The pattern stretched back 6 months, each month's withdrawals larger than the last. Cross-referencing with project timelines, none of these expenses aligned with legitimate business needs. My military training kicked in, organizing data like intelligence reports. Eric's increasingly aggressive demands for company control coincided perfectly with escalating financial pressure. The timeline was too precise to be coincidental, but pressure from what? His salary was generous. Margaret's trust fund had given him financial independence. The luxury condo in Soho came with the job. What could possibly require $47,000 in 6 months? The whiskey glass felt heavy in my hand. Outside, wind rattled the windows like skeleton fingers on glass. This house had sheltered 3 generations of Bennetts, witnessed births and deaths and everything between. But tonight it felt like a mausoleum for dreams I'd held about my only son. The computer screen glowed with numbers that didn't add up to the boy I'd taught to use a level, to measure twice and cut once, to build things that lasted. When had Eric stopped building and started, what? Taking? Stealing? I closed the laptop and finished my whiskey. Tomorrow I'd dig deeper into these financial anomalies. Tonight, I needed sleep and clearer thinking than wounded paternal pride allowed. But sleep came hard when your son's desperation looked more like danger than family drama. Coffee steamed beside scattered financial reports as I arrived at the office 2 hours early. The security guard had looked surprised to see me at 7:15, but insomnia had driven me from the empty house to find answers about Eric's mysterious expenses. The deeper I dug, the worse it looked. Personal charges to the corporate credit card, expense reports for non-existent client dinners, cash advances that violated every company policy I'd established. $47,000 in 6 months painted a picture of someone drowning in debt. My phone rang at exactly 9:15. "Dad?" Eric's voice carried none of yesterday's aggression. "I'm sorry about yesterday. I was stressed about the Harbor Point project." I leaned back in my chair, studying the financial evidence spread across my desk. "Let's forget it. What did you want?" "I booked a cruise for 2, just you and me." His tone was carefully casual, like negotiations for $1 million contract. "Like those fishing trips we used to take, remember? Before everything got so complicated." "A cruise?" This was unexpected. "When?" 5 days in the Caribbean, Miami to Nassau, Jamaica, then back. No phones, no work interruptions. Eric's words came quickly, efficiently planned. Just quiet time to talk, really talk, not argue across a desk. The luxury liner Caribbean dream. 5-star accommodations. Departure in 3 days from Miami, which meant flying from New York. Just father and son. No spouses, no business associates, no distractions from whatever conversation Eric apparently needed to have. My military instincts recognized a tactical retreat when I heard one. Yesterday's aggressive demands, followed by today's peace offering, felt choreographed. But the desperate hope in Eric's voice, the mention of our old fishing trips when he'd been 12 and still looked at me like I could move mountains, that sounded genuine. "You really want to do this?" I asked, fingers drumming against the expense reports. "Just the 2 of us?" "Dad, we haven't spent real time together in years. Every conversation happens in boardrooms or over business dinners." His voice softened. "I miss talking to you. Not Bennett Construction's founder, just my father." The words hit harder than yesterday's accusations. When had I become so focused on building the business that I'd forgotten to build the relationship? Margaret had warned me about this years ago, but I'd always promised there would be time later. Later, when the next project finished. Later, when the company stabilized. Later never came. "All right." The decision surprised me as much as him. "When do we sail?" "March 19th, 3 days from now." Relief flooded his voice. "I'll handle all the arrangements. You just pack light clothes and your appetite for Caribbean seafood." After hanging up, I stared at my calendar. 3 days to clear my schedule and fly to Miami. 3 days to decide whether to confront him about the financial irregularities during the cruise or let father-son time heal whatever was driving his desperation. The financial reports still demanded answers, but maybe those answers would come easier with 5 days of ocean between us and the corporate battlefield where we'd been waging war. I wrote Caribbean Cruise Eric in my calendar for March 19th through 24th. Below it, I added a note. Real conversation. Finally. The expense reports could wait. My son was reaching out, and 40 years of missed opportunities had taught me not to waste the ones that came gift-wrapped in Caribbean sunshine, even if my instincts whispered that gifts from desperate people sometimes carried hidden costs. 2 days of silence from Eric had given me time to think. I'd written his cruise invitation in my calendar like a business appointment, but something about the gesture felt different from his usual calculated moves. Maybe desperation had finally taught him humility. Wednesday morning found me in my walk-in closet, laying out clothes with military precision. Lightweight khakis, cotton shirts, swimming trunks I hadn't worn since Margaret's death. The Caribbean demanded different armor than Manhattan boardrooms. Each item folded with hospital corners, packed in compartments like ammunition in a supply crate. My hands trembled slightly arranging the medications. 65 years of construction work had left their mark. Arthritis in my knuckles, a reconstructed knee from a crane accident, blood pressure pills that kept me functional. Eric had never seen me as anything but invincible. This cruise might teach us both about limitations. The drive to Paul Stevens' law office took 40 minutes through Thursday evening traffic. His secretary had left hours ago, but Paul waited in his mahogany-paneled sanctuary, power of attorney documents spread across his desk like battle plans. A cruise with Eric? Paul leaned back in his leather chair, 60 years of legal wisdom creasing his forehead. After Tuesday's argument, he wants to reconcile. I signed the temporary delegation papers, each signature transferring pieces of my empire to trusted subordinates. Maybe I was too harsh about the inheritance timeline. Paul's pen drummed against the desk, a nervous habit I'd noticed during difficult negotiations. Will, be careful. I know he's your son, but that outburst in your office? What are you trying to say? Nothing specific. He gathered the signed documents with unnecessary care. Just stay in touch. Check in when you can. Back home, I updated my life insurance beneficiary information. Routine maintenance I'd neglected since Margaret's passing. Eric remained the primary recipient of 40 years accumulated wealth. The irony struck me, planning for death while hoping to repair life. My computer screen glowed with Bennett Construction's organizational chart. Senior managers would handle daily operations. Emergency protocols were established. The company had survived my Vietnam deployment. It could manage 5 days in the Caribbean. But the financial irregularities Eric didn't know I'd discovered haunted my preparations. $47,000 in unexplained expenses. Personal charges disguised as business costs. The pattern suggested someone drowning in debt, grasping for lifelines that didn't exist. Perhaps this cruise represented his attempt to confess. Man to man, father to son, without corporate politics poisoning the conversation. Ocean Air had a way of stripping pretense, revealing truth beneath carefully constructed facades. I double-checked my packed suitcase, passport, cruise tickets, emergency contacts, everything organized, everything planned. Tomorrow's 6 a.m. flight to Miami would begin either reconciliation or revelation. The grandfather clock in my study chimed 11 times. Packed bags sat beside my desk, like loyal soldiers awaiting deployment orders. Through the windows, Westchester slept peacefully under March stars that would soon give way to Caribbean constellations. Whatever Eric needed to tell me, we'd have 5 days and endless ocean to work through it properly. Miami's skyline disappeared behind us as Caribbean Dreams engines pushed 18 decks of luxury through crystal blue water. I gripped the stern rail, watching America fade into memory while salt spray misted my face. Beside me, Eric pointed toward dolphins racing our wake. Look at them go! His enthusiasm seemed genuine for the first time in months. Remember teaching me to spot dolphins during those fishing trips? The boy who'd once begged for bedtime stories about construction sites stood beside me now, designer polo shirt replacing the grass-stained t-shirts of childhood. But his smile carried echoes of simpler times, before business school taught him that everything had a price. Your mother loved watching them. I adjusted my sun hat, feeling years lighter without suit jackets and conference calls. She said they reminded her that work wasn't everything. Eric carried my luggage to the Ocean View suite without being asked. Our adjoining cabins connected through a shared balcony overlooking endless water. He'd booked first-class accommodations, spare no expense, behavior that might have raised red flags if I hadn't been so grateful for his attention. The ship's dining room sparkled with crystal and white linens. Eric ordered a bottle of wine that cost more than most people's monthly salary, raising his glass toward the setting sun, streaming through panoramic windows. To new beginnings, he toasted, clinking crystal against crystal, and learning from past mistakes. I'll drink to that. The wine tasted like forgiveness, smooth and warm. Around us, families laughed over seafood platters, while steel drum music drifted from the pool deck. Paradise had a way of making problems seem smaller. Eric's questions flowed naturally as the evening progressed. Company history, construction techniques, stories about building the Manhattan Empire from a single truck, and unlimited determination. He listened with the focus he'd shown as a child, before Harvard taught him that inherited wealth was a right rather than a responsibility. I want to understand the business from the ground up, he said, cutting his lobster with surgical precision. Maybe start at actual construction sites instead of boardroom presentations. The words I'd waited decades to hear. Margaret would have cried with joy watching her son finally embrace the family legacy. That's wise. You can't lead people whose work you don't understand. Nassau's port bustled with tourist energy the next morning. Eric insisted on paying for everything. Taxi rides, market souvenirs, lunch at a beachfront restaurant where conch shells decorated weathered tables. He bought me expensive Bahamian rum, claiming it would remind me of our time together. His camera captured dozens of photos, father and son against tropical backgrounds, smiling like we hadn't argued in years. For memories, he explained, but something in his intensity suggested these images served a deeper purpose I couldn't identify. Walking through the straw market, Eric's arm steadied me when cobblestones caught my heel. His attentiveness felt almost excessive, like a performance designed for an invisible audience. But gratitude overwhelmed suspicion. My son was finally acting like the man I'd hoped he'd become. That evening, we watched sunset paint the Caribbean in gold and orange while the ship's orchestra played classical music. Eric had chosen a quiet section of the upper deck, away from crowds and distractions, perfect for the conversations we'd postponed too long. Dad, thank you for this trip. His voice carried emotions I hadn't heard since childhood. I realized I was being selfish about the company timeline. The financial irregularities I'd discovered seemed less important now. Family mattered more than spreadsheets. Love conquered suspicion, just as Margaret had always insisted it would. 4 days of Caribbean sunshine had washed away office tensions, replacing them with hope for our future together. The sunset painted everything in gold, the ocean, the ship's white railings, even Eric's face as he suggested we move to a quieter section of the deck. Other passengers had gathered near the pool area for evening entertainment, leaving us alone at the stern, where only ocean stretched toward the horizon. Perfect night for serious conversation, Eric murmured, his hands gripping the rail with unusual intensity. The charming facade he had maintained for 4 days flickered like a candle in wind. It's been a perfect trip. I leaned against the railing, completely relaxed for the first time in months. You've reminded me what matters most. Family, not just business. Eric's smile faltered. Something desperate flickered behind his eyes. The same fear I'd glimpsed in my office days ago. Dad, I can't wait any longer. I need the company now. The words hit like cold water. We agreed. You're going to learn from the ground up. Earn your position properly. I have debts! The mask shattered completely. I lost huge money on cryptocurrency investments, real estate deals that went bad. I need control of Bennett Construction immediately. My stomach dropped. 4 days of reconciliation dissolved like morning mist. What? Eric, why didn't you tell me this before? Because I knew you'd judge me, lecture me about fiscal responsibility and earning my way. He paced now, no longer the attentive son, but a cornered animal. I need company control to secure loans, to save my investments. The financial irregularities I'd discovered suddenly made perfect sense. $47,000 in 6 months, just the tip of an iceberg that could sink us both. How much do you owe? Millions. His voice cracked. If I don't get control soon, everything crashes. My marriage, my reputation, everything. Eric, we can work through this together. The company can absorb some losses, restructure your responsibilities. No! He wheeled toward me, eyes wild with desperation. I need it all. Now! You have to retire and turn everything over to me. Never! The word came from my core, 40 years of principles crystallizing into single syllable. Not after these lies. Not after you manipulated me into this cruise just to... Then goodbye, Dad. Eric's hands hit my chest like pistons. The railing caught my knees. Gravity claimed me with the same cold efficiency that had built my empire. The last thing I heard before water swallowed my scream was his voice, cruel and final. The sharks will be glad to see you. Caribbean waves closed over my head like a liquid grave. 65 years of life compressed into the simple mathematics of survival. Swim or die. My son had chosen his inheritance over my life. The ocean didn't care about family loyalty or business empires. It only understood strength, and 40 years after Vietnam taught me about survival, those lessons kicked in with crystal clarity. I broke the surface gasping, watching Caribbean Dream's lights grow smaller in the distance. Eric stood at the rail for a moment, a tiny figure against the massive ship, before disappearing into shadows. Salt water stung my eyes, but not as much as the knowledge that I'd raised a killer. Swimming had kept me fit through decades of desk work. Military training had prepared me for worse situations than this. The water was warm, the sea relatively calm. But betrayal by your only son creates wounds that no amount of survival skills can heal. I began swimming toward what I hoped was land, each stroke carrying me further from the son who'd tried to murder his father for money. The Caribbean night swallowed my tears along with the ocean spray. Water exploded around me like a cold fist. The Caribbean that had seemed so peaceful from the deck now wrapped around my body like liquid concrete. My dress shirt and jacket dragged me down, while Eric's cruel laughter echoed in my ears. Or maybe that was just the ocean's roar. Stay calm, Will. You survived Vietnam. You can survive this too. Military training kicked in before panic could take hold. First assessment, consciousness intact, no obvious injuries, warm water temperature working in my favor. The ship's lights were already distant stars, too far for rescue calls to matter. Eric had chosen his moment perfectly. Isolated deck, calm seas, no witnesses. My waterlogged jacket felt like wearing chainmail. I struggled out of it, letting 40 years of Manhattan success sink into the Caribbean depths. The dress shoes followed. Leather anchors that served no purpose now, except to drag me toward the bottom where Eric expected me to rest forever. That damn boy. But first, I need to stay alive. Floating on my back, I forced my breathing into combat rhythm. In through the nose, hold, out through the mouth. Panic burned oxygen. Oxygen meant life. Simple mathematics that had kept me breathing in rice paddies while younger men drowned in their own fear. The ocean stretched endlessly in every direction. Navigation stars twinkled overhead like the same constellations that had guided me through Mekong Delta nights when survival meant moving toward dawn instead of surrendering to darkness. A white object bobbed 20 feet away, rectangular, about the size of a briefcase. Ship's debris, probably from the galley. I swam toward it with measured strokes, conserving energy like ammunition during a long siege. The plastic container was intact, sealed tight, creating perfect flotation support. Breathe steady. Don't waste energy on panic. Using the container as a chest rest, I achieved sustainable floating position. The military had taught me to survive on nothing but will and water for days. Eric's attempt at patricide had just become his first business mistake, underestimating the old man's resilience. Hours passed like years. The container kept me stable, while Caribbean currents carried me slowly northwest. My watch still worked, 10:30 p.m. Eric was probably celebrating in his luxury cabin, toasting my death with champagne he'd bought, using company funds stolen from my own accounts. 40 years of building an empire from nothing, and my own son tries to destroy it all with a single push. But rage was a luxury I couldn't afford. Cold calculation served survival better than hot emotion. Dawn would bring fishing boats. The Bahamas lay somewhere to the north. Cuban refugees had crossed worse waters in vessels less seaworthy than my plastic lifeline. The ocean that was supposed to be my grave became my proving ground instead. Every stroke toward shore was a vote against Eric's vision of my future. Every breath was evidence that his inheritance plan required better execution. Salt water stung my eyes, but not as much as the knowledge that I'd raised a killer. The boy I'd taught to use a level, to measure twice and cut once, had measured my life and found it expendable. Distance lights flickered on the horizon, too far to be rescue, but close enough to be hope. Fishing vessels beginning dawn routines, perhaps. Professional mariners who understood that the ocean gave life as often as it took life. My grip on the container remained strong. Vietnam had taught me that survival was 10% skill and 90% refusing to quit. Eric had badly miscalculated both percentages. "Senor! Hey, senor in the water!" The voice cut through ocean sound like salvation itself. I turned toward the approaching fishing boat, its diesel engine coughing like an old man climbing stairs. Sunrise painted everything gold, the water, the weathered hull, even the concerned faces of 3 fishermen leaning over the side. "How did you end up out here?" Captain Jose Garcia extended a life ring while his crew prepared a rope ladder. His weathered hands spoke of decades pulling nets and fighting storms. "Fell overboard from a cruise ship." The lie came easily, polished by hours of floating preparation. "Held on to this container all night." "Virgin Mary, you're a true warrior." Jose's crew hauled me aboard with professional efficiency. The boat's deck felt solid as Manhattan bedrock beneath my exhausted body. Not the first time I fought for my life. They wrapped me in wool blankets that smelled of fish and diesel fuel, the most beautiful perfume I'd ever experienced. Hot coffee appeared in my shaking hands, black and strong enough to wake the dead, which, according to Eric's plan, I was supposed to be. Santa Maria was a working vessel, 35 feet of practical fishing equipment and honest sweat. Jose's crew moved with quiet competence, checking my pulse, examining the scrapes on my arms, offering crackers from their lunch supplies. "We need to call the Coast Guard," Jose announced, already reaching for his radio. "Report the rescue, get you to a hospital." "Yes, please." Medical documentation would be crucial evidence later. "I need complete records of everything. When you found me, my condition, the location." Jose looked puzzled by my specificity, but maritime rescue protocol required detailed reporting anyway. His radio crackled to life, Spanish and English mixing, as he coordinated with Fort Lauderdale authorities. The engine room's heat gradually warmed muscles that had spent 10 hours fighting hypothermia. I accepted dry clothes from Jose's locker, work pants and a fishing shirt that transformed me from Manhattan executive into anonymous survivor. "Your family will be worried sick," Jose observed, steering toward Florida's distant coastline. "They will be." Though not in the way he imagined, Eric was probably practicing his grief performance, preparing to console Kate and the grandchildren while inheriting 40 years of accumulated wealth. Harbor lights grew larger as we approached Fort Lauderdale. The Coast Guard had arranged ambulance transport and hospital evaluation. "Standard procedure for overboard rescues," Jose explained. "Everything documented, everything official, perfect for my purposes." "Senor, you have guardian angels watching over you," Jose said as we entered the harbor. "Most people don't survive a night in open water." Maybe I had work left to finish. The ambulance crew was professional and thorough. Blood pressure stable, temperature returning to normal, minor abrasions from debris contact. I insisted on copies of all medical reports for insurance purposes, which they provided without question. Jose refused payment for the rescue, but I pressed his business card into my shirt pocket. His testimony would be invaluable when prosecutors needed to establish the timeline of Eric's attempted murder. During the ambulance ride, I calculated remaining time. Today was March 25th. The cruise ship would dock in Miami. March 27th evening, Eric would fly back to New York. March 28th, probably scheduling meetings with Paul Stevens about managing my estate during his grief. 48 hours to turn Eric's celebration into his arrest warrant. The hospital paperwork listed me as John Williams, close enough to my real name for identification purposes, different enough to avoid immediate recognition. I needed complete anonymity until Eric walked into Paul's office expecting sympathy instead of handcuffs. From my hospital bed, Fort Lauderdale looked like any coastal city. But it represented something more important, the launching point for justice 40 years in the making. Eric had taught me a valuable lesson about family loyalty. Now I would teach him about consequences. The emergency room doctor was younger than Eric, all efficiency and clipboard authority. "You were very lucky." hypothermia, some scrapes, but nothing serious that rest won't cure. Can I get copies of all the medical reports? I asked, signing discharge papers with steady hands. My insurance company will want complete documentation. Of course, the nurse will provide everything. 2 hours later, I walked out of Fort Lauderdale General Hospital, carrying a manila envelope containing proof of Eric's crime, medical evidence, rescue timeline, witness contact information, everything a prosecutor would need to establish attempted murder. The taxi dropped me at a downtown electronics store, where I purchased a prepaid phone with cash. No credit cards, no paper trails Eric could trace if he decided to investigate my accidental death. The clerk barely looked up from his magazine while processing the sale. Next stop, men's clothing store. The fishing clothes Jose had provided marked me as a survivor, but I needed to look like William Bennett again. Expensive suit, silk tie, leather shoes that announced success rather than desperation. Image mattered in Manhattan, especially when planning justice. I have 48 hours. That's enough time. Miami International Airport buzzed with afternoon travelers. First-class ticket to LaGuardia, purchased under credentials, borrowed from a business associate who owed me favors. Security accepted my medical bracelet explanation for the hospital smell still clinging to my clothes. During the 3-hour flight, I constructed Eric's timeline with military precision. Right now, he was probably enjoying the ship's farewell dinner, accepting condolences from passengers who'd heard about the tragic accident. Tomorrow evening, he'd dock in Miami. Thursday morning, he'd fly home to begin claiming his inheritance. The Plaza Hotel's lobby welcomed me like an old friend. 40 years of business success bought recognition and discretion from staff who remembered important guests. The suite cost more per night than most people earned in a week, but it provided everything I needed: privacy, communication equipment, and space to organize evidence. My first call went to the hospital billing department. I need rush copies of all medical records from today's treatment. Yes, I'll pay the express processing fee. Second call, Jose Garcia's fishing boat business. His wife answered, explained Jose was still at sea but would return tomorrow. I left a number where he could reach John Williams about insurance documentation for the rescue. The hotel business center hummed with quiet efficiency after midnight. I spread medical reports across the mahogany table like battle plans, cross-referencing times and locations with Eric's probable actions. The timeline painted a clear picture of premeditation and attempted murder. Room service delivered coffee and sandwiches at 2 a.m. The night manager personally ensured my privacy, probably assuming I was handling some corporate crisis. If only he knew the crisis involved my son trying to inherit my empire through patricide. Wednesday morning brought confirmation calls from the hospital and Coast Guard. All documentation was complete and available. Jose Garcia had provided detailed witness testimony about finding me at dawn. The evidence chain was solid as concrete. By Wednesday evening, my hotel suite resembled a military command center. Medical records organized chronologically. Witness statements typed and ready for legal presentation. Financial evidence of Eric's company embezzlement prepared for prosecutors. Timeline charts showing premeditation spanning weeks of cruise planning. Everything documented, everything provable, everything designed to transform Eric's inheritance celebration into his criminal conviction. The prepaid phone showed 6:30 p.m. Eric's cruise ship was probably approaching Miami Harbor. Victory champagne flowing while passengers shared tragic stories about the poor man who'd fallen overboard. Tomorrow morning, I would call Paul Stevens and arrange Eric's surprise welcome home party. Guest list: police detectives, prosecutors, and one father who'd refused to stay dead. Through the plaza's windows, Manhattan spread like my empire in miniature. Orderly, logical, built on principles Eric had never understood. Tomorrow would teach him that some foundations couldn't be destroyed by a single push. I opened my laptop and began typing Paul's briefing document. Every detail mattered. Every piece of evidence had to be perfect. Eric wanted my inheritance. He was about to receive exactly what he deserved. Paul Stevens was still at his desk when I arrived at his law firm, briefcase in hand and 40 years of friendship about to be tested by the most shocking revelation of our professional relationship. The evening security guard had recognized me, allowing passage to the 45th floor, where Manhattan's legal elite handled their most sensitive cases. Will? Paul looked up from his papers, reading glasses reflecting the desk lamp's amber glow. I wasn't expecting you back from the cruise until tomorrow. There was a problem with the cruise. I settled into the leather chair across from his mahogany desk, the same seat where we'd negotiated hundreds of contracts and sealed deals worth millions. A serious problem. Paul's expression shifted from casual greeting to professional concern as I opened the briefcase containing medical reports, witness contact information, and documentation that would destroy his understanding of Eric's character forever. Paul, Eric tried to murder me. The words hit him like a physical blow. His pen dropped, papers scattered, and 40 years of legal composure cracked across his weathered face. Will, this is incredible. Your own son. I spread the evidence across his desk with military precision. Medical records from Fort Lauderdale General, rescue documentation from Jose Garcia, timeline charts showing Eric's premeditation. Each document told pieces of a story that painted my son as a desperate killer willing to murder a family for inheritance. The medical reports confirm hypothermia and injuries consistent with being thrown overboard, I explained, watching Paul absorb details with professional focus. Jose Garcia, the fisherman who rescued me, is willing to testify about finding me 15 miles from the cruise ship at dawn. Paul studied each document, his legal mind processing evidence and building case strategy. We have all the evidence we need for attempted murder charges, medical reports, rescue witnesses, clear motive through his financial desperation. I want him to get the maximum sentence. Attempted murder, possibly conspiracy given the premeditation. Paul was already calculating legal precedents and sentencing guidelines. 15 to 20 years, especially with the family relationship as an aggravating factor. We worked through the evening, Paul contacting Detective Laura Martinez, his connection in NYPD's criminal division. She specialized in attempted murder cases and had worked with Paul's criminal referrals for years. Her professional assessment confirmed what we already knew. The evidence was overwhelming. Eric returns tomorrow evening, I said, checking my watch. He'll come to the house expecting it empty, planning to begin inheritance procedures. Paul coordinated arrest logistics with Detective Martinez, while I provided Eric's expected arrival time and house layout. Police positioning, warrant preparation, tactical approach. Everything planned with the same precision I'd used to build construction projects. Jose Garcia answered Paul's call from his fishing boat, still anchored off Miami. His English was sufficient for court testimony, his memory clear about rescue details, his willingness to travel to New York confirmed. Another piece of evidence secured. The arrest warrant would be signed by morning. Officers positioned around my Westchester house by evening. Eric's surprise homecoming would become his introduction to criminal justice. 40 years of friendship, Will, and I've never seen you this calm about something so personal. Paul gathered the evidence files, organizing them for tomorrow's legal proceedings. Military training taught me to channel emotion into strategy. I closed the briefcase, my part of the preparation complete. Eric calculated that family loyalty would blind me to his betrayal. He was wrong. Tomorrow evening, Eric would discover that some calculations proved fatal. The living room felt like a courtroom as I sat in my leather chair, every detail arranged for maximum dramatic impact. Paul positioned himself behind the mahogany bookshelf, while Detective Laura Martinez remained hidden near the fireplace. Eric's headlights swept across the windows at exactly 6:30 p.m., right on schedule. His key turned in the lock with confident ease, the sound of a son coming home to claim his inheritance. The front door opened, footsteps crossed the marble foyer, and his voice called out tentatively into what he expected to be an empty house. "Hello? Anyone here?" I switched on the reading lamp. "Welcome home, son. How was the cruise?" Eric appeared in the doorway, designer luggage in hand, expensive suit wrinkled from travel. His face transformed from casual curiosity to absolute shock as his brain processed the impossible sight of his father sitting alive in the chair where he'd expected to find funeral arrangements. "Dad? But how?" The luggage hit the marble floor with a crash that echoed through the house like thunder. Eric's complexion drained from healthy Caribbean tan to morgue pale in the span of heartbeats. His hands trembled, his knees buckled, and reality crashed around him like ocean waves. The sharks weren't as hungry as you hoped. I remained perfectly still, voice carrying the same cold authority I'd used in construction site negotiations. Military training includes swimming, Eric, even at 65. I can explain. His voice cracked like a teenager caught stealing. It was an accident. I was angry, we argued. I pushed you, but I didn't mean. Too late for explanations. I gestured toward the shadows where Detective Martinez stepped into the light, badge and handcuffs gleaming. I brought some people to meet you. Detective Martinez was 40 years old, built like someone who'd spent decades dealing with criminals smarter than Eric. Her voice carried professional authority as she approached my son with practiced efficiency. Eric Bennett, you're under arrest for attempted murder in the first degree. Paul emerged from behind the bookshelf, completing the trap that had been 50 hours in the making. Eric looked between the three of us like a cornered animal, finally understanding that all escape routes had been blocked. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Detective Martinez continued the Miranda recitation, while Eric stood frozen, unable to process how his perfect murder had become his perfect arrest. 2 additional officers entered from the kitchen and front porch, surrounding Eric with professional competence. No violence, no drama, just the cold efficiency of justice finally catching up with family betrayal. The handcuffs clicked around Eric's wrists with metallic finality. His expensive watch, his designer clothes, his confident bearing, all reduced to nothing by steel restraints and legal consequences he'd never considered during his Caribbean murder plot. The inheritance will have to wait, son. You'll be in prison. As they led Eric toward the door, he turned back with desperate eyes that reminded me of the boy I'd taught to use construction tools, the Harvard graduate I'd been so proud of, the son who'd tried to murder his father for money. Dad, please, I'm your only son. Not anymore. The police cars disappeared down my driveway, red lights fading like sunset over 40 years of fatherhood destroyed by greed. Paul and I stood in the empty foyer, surrounded by marble floors that had witnessed Eric's childhood laughter, and now echoed with the hollow sound of justice served. Tomorrow would bring arraignment hearings and legal proceedings. Tonight brought only silence and the bitter satisfaction of perfect revenge executed with precision Eric had never learned to appreciate. The house felt different now, not empty, but cleansed. 2 months of legal proceedings led to this moment. Judge Harrison's gavel poised above the bench as Manhattan Criminal Court held its breath. Eric sat at the defense table, expensive lawyers unable to overcome medical evidence, witness testimony, and the simple fact that attempted murder leaves traces no amount of legal skill can erase. Having reviewed all evidence and testimony, Judge Harrison announced, his voice carrying the weight of 40 years on the bench, I find the defendant guilty on all counts. The gallery buzzed with whispered reactions. Reporters scribbled notes while business associates who'd once respected the Bennett name processed the shocking family scandal. I sat in the front row, Paul beside me, watching justice unfold with the same methodical precision I'd used to build skyscrapers. Eric Bennett, the judge continued, you are hereby sentenced to 18 years in state prison without possibility of parole for 8 years. 18 years. Eric would be 53 when released, his prime years spent contemplating the cost of patricide. The sentence was severe enough to satisfy justice, realistic enough to reflect his lack of prior criminal record. Outside the courthouse, reporters thrust microphones toward my face as I descended the stone steps into afternoon sunlight. The questions came rapid fire. How did it feel? Would I forgive Eric? What about the company's future? Justice has been served, I said, keeping my statement brief and professional. I only regret the price was so high. The media attention would fade within weeks, but Bennett Construction would endure. The company I'd built from a single truck had survived family betrayal and would continue long after both Eric and I were gone. That was what mattered. Legacy built on merit rather than blood. Back in my Manhattan office, the same space where Eric had demanded early inheritance just 3 months ago, I reviewed applications from young managers who'd impressed me during the legal proceedings. Competence, integrity, work ethic. Qualities Eric had never developed despite every advantage. What about succession planning? Paul asked during our post-trial meeting. A new heir? I'll pass leadership to whoever deserves it, not necessarily family. The decision felt liberating rather than tragic. Blood relationships meant nothing if they lacked character and wisdom. Better to entrust my life's work to strangers who understood construction principles than to family members who viewed inheritance as entitlement rather than responsibility. Maria Santos, a 32-year-old project manager who'd started as a construction site engineer, knocked on my office door. She'd handled the Harbor Point development with efficiency that reminded me of my younger self: attention to detail, respect for workers, understanding that buildings succeed through foundation strength rather than surface appearance. Mr. Bennett, the quarterly reports are ready for your review. Actually, Maria, I'd like to discuss your long-term career plans. 6 months later, Bennett Construction announced its new leadership structure, a merit-based advancement program that would identify future executives through performance rather than genetics. The company would survive me through people who'd earned their positions, not inherited them. Eric's prison letters went unopened. Some betrayals cut too deep for forgiveness, even from family. He'd chosen money over love, inheritance over integrity. The consequences would follow him for decades. Through my office windows, Manhattan stretched toward horizons filled with buildings I'd helped create. Construction cranes dotted the skyline like steel prayers, evidence that the city grew stronger through work rather than scheming, effort rather than entitlement. My empire would outlive both Eric and me, passed to hands worthy of holding it. Justice had been served, but more importantly, justice would continue through people who understood that true inheritance must be earned through character, not claimed through crime. The phone rang. Another project. Another opportunity to build something lasting. I answered with the same energy that had driven 40 years of success, knowing now that family legacy meant nothing without family honor. Some buildings rise from solid foundations. Others crumble from internal rot. I'd built mine to last. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.